What's up, Buckeye fans? It's Patrick Murphy here for your Bucknuts Happy Hour weekly show. I forgot to grab a beer, which is problematic, actually. Let's just do that real quick. All right. Didn't want to disappoint. That's my mistake. Was getting things ready. Some of the stuff that we have done to bring this to you has changed, so I had to change some things. Got me all frazzled. Anyway, welcome to the Bucknuts Happy Hour this week. We have a fun show, I think, for you. Maybe a controversial show. I don't know. I'm going to drink another Red Stripe today. Got a case of these. Love Red Stripe. Hooray beer. So I want to talk today mainly about a story I wrote this week that was ranking Ohio State's position groups. I got some people that agreed with me, some people that didn't agree with me so much. And I think that's kind of what the point of these rankings are. So cheers to those of you who read that. Red Stripe, hooray beer. But also, I want to get into, off the top, the conversation about Ohio State kickoff times. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that, but I figure at some point we're going to have questions about that and might as well address it off the top. But if you have questions, if you're watching this live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, please throw those in the comments section. I'll try and get to answer a bunch of those towards the end of this show, or as they come along. If you have comments about the kickoff times that we're going to discuss, or my rankings, which I'm sure people will, feel free to throw those in the comment section. I will address those. I have no problem taking feedback on what people think. So feel free to do that. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, please give that a thumbs up, comment, podcast, 5-star review. All of that stuff is super important and really helps us out as we continue to grow this channel. Let's get into it, though, off the top. And let's start with this week, the news that, and it's not surprising, Ohio State and Michigan, or excuse me, the Ohio State Michigan channel did come out. It's going to be on Fox, as we all expected. But also, the Ohio State Texas game is going to be on Fox. That was what was announced. I know there was some reporting out there that the kickoff time had been announced. It has not. It was intentionally not announced by Fox. I think even the Ohio State Michigan game was not announced. But because some people reported that it was going to be a noon kickoff, and there's the assumption that because it's on Fox, it will be a big noon game, which I think is a fair assumption, most likely. There has been a lot of conversation this week about, and this is not exclusive to this week, it happens every time these games come out, Penn State, all these games, about the kickoff times. And I completely understand the frustration by fans. I had some people say to me, well, you're a media member, you just don't want to work late. Actually, I think I'm probably one of the few media members that doesn't mind night games. I am just a night owl. I tend to stay up, 1, 2 in the morning regularly. That's when I'm more awake. I do some work then. Sometimes I'm just watching TV, watching movie, whatever it may be. So being at Ohio Stadium or at another stadium till 2, 3 in the morning, while not the most convenient thing, I will admit that, is not something I completely dislike. Like I think other people in college football may. I don't want to speak for anybody, but I do think that generally, if you were to talk to media members, I think they would tell you that they prefer the earlier kickoffs because obviously it gets you out of work earlier. And everyone wants that, right? Especially on a Saturday in the fall when there's other games on and things like that. You can have your Saturday evening. And I do enjoy that part of it as well. But I also think that we should have this conversation about these kickoff times. So first, I think it's important to remember the Big Ten signed this agreement with Fox back when Kevin Warren was the commissioner. You can blame Kevin Warren if you want. They signed this agreement. It is a deal. I forget how long it lasts off the top of my head, but it's going to last for a while. And it's making the Big Ten and each of the Big Ten teams a lot of money. And each of the Big Ten teams had some say in this at the time. And this wasn't just Kevin Warren operating by himself. he consulted with, everybody really involved in these programs, athletic directors, who I assume talk to their coaches in all sports that are going to be broadcast on Fox. So this was an agreement. This is a deal. It's a contract. I've seen suggestions that Ohio State gets out of it or things like that. Like, it's not going to happen unless Ohio State decides to go independent, which I don't think they will. You're in this Fox deal, and you also have NBC, and you also have CBS as a part of it. But Fox is the primary beneficiary, primary network of this. And Fox has looked at the numbers and decided, as you all know, that noon, putting these bigger games at noon, will get more eyeballs on it. And if you think about it, that makes some sense. Now, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do for your customers. If you go and look at, what especially Ohio State fans have said, they've very much expressed, their displeasure on all of this. And I think that Fox has probably heard some of that. We'll get to that in a minute. But the idea behind it, that, okay, most people are looking for the big games at night. So if you look at that noon window, it's a lot of games that people probably aren't as excited about. So why don't we put a major game at that window? And if you look at Fox's numbers, it has worked. You look at the Ohio State-Michigan games, you look at Ohio State-Penn State when they've been noon games on Big Noon, even last year's Michigan-Texas game, which was at Michigan, a noon game. All those did big numbers, right? And so from a pure ratings perspective, this has done what Fox intended, which means Fox is making money, the Big Ten's making money, Ohio State's making money. So there's the reasoning behind it, simply. If you want to learn more about this whole thing, Joel Klatt from Fox has talked about it several times. He did a podcast last year that not only talked about the reasoning behind it, but also went into the draft process, so to speak, of how these games get picked for different networks. I thought it was really interesting. It was probably about a year ago when Joel Klatt dropped that podcast. So that's something you can check out if you want. But because of this, and because Ohio State is the best team in the Big Ten, I know Michigan has won the Big Ten these last few years, Oregon last season, Michigan won the national championship. But in terms of eyeballs and what people care about, Ohio State is that team. Michigan's close, Penn State's there, Oregon, USC, like those will all continue to grow as brands in Big Ten markets now. But because you are Ohio State and because you are the team, you have been selected more than anyone else for these big noon kickoffs. And do I think that they should have some sort of limit on how many times a team should be selected? I think that makes sense, but why would Fox do that? They know if they put Ohio State on at noon, you're going to get the most eyeballs. So I don't know why Fox would agree to that unless programs really push for it. I think other programs in the Big Ten would have to agree to that as well. Maybe you make it so that every team has to be on X amount of time, and you can't do it. There's just not enough weeks in the year, but try and figure out something so it benefits the teams that aren't on there as much. But again, Fox, is Fox going to want a Northwestern Purdue game as their game of the week? Probably not. So I don't know if that's a realistic option for Fox. When it comes to a game like Texas, no doubt that should be at night. I absolutely think that should be a night game. It's going to be the biggest game of week one. Two teams that are probably top 3, top 5, wherever they end up ranked. Two teams that just played in the college football playoff semifinal. You've got big names, Jeremiah Smith, Arch Manning, two big time coaches, and Ryan Day and Steve Sarkisian. I mean, this just is screaming night game if this were on any other network. But if you're Fox, again, you look at the schedule that week, there's several games, big time games, as there always are that first week of the season. And if you put your game at noon, that Ohio State-Texas game, you are going to get more eyeballs than you will if you're competing with, say, the Florida State-Alabama game. I don't remember. I know Clemson plays that. There's a handful of big games that are going to attract eyeballs from each other if they are all even 3:30 night games, whatever. They're all going to kind of steal ratings from each other. And Fox doesn't want that. Fox wants everyone watching their game. So that's why I think everyone assumes that this game is going to be on Fox. Or, excuse me, it is going to be on Fox at noon, which, again, going back to last year, Michigan, Texas, it was a noon game. In 2 years, when Ohio State goes to Texas, Texas in the SEC is an ESPN partner, that game's definitely going to be at night down in Austin. So is it fair? No. From a fan perspective, maybe a competitive perspective. So then this, I don't remember the Ohio representative's name, but this came out, we're recording this on Friday, it came out on Thursday, that this Ohio representative proposed this idea that AP top 10 games at Ohio Stadium cannot be played at noon. And I think this is absolutely ridiculous. To try and determine that, try and make a law about this. First of all, let's be clear. When representatives, when any political figure puts out something like that, yes, they may care about it. This may be a something that is passionate to this individual, but it's also to garner attention because they know it's a hot button topic. And that is what this is about. This isn't actually going to happen. There's not going to be a law that Ohio State can't play top 10 games at noon. And frankly, as much as I would like to see Ohio State be able to play these bigger games at night at 3:30, whatever it may be, I don't think it makes any sense at all to have to legislate that ahead of time. And I had some people pushing back with me on Twitter yesterday saying I didn't read it, first of all, because I said there are games that deserve to be at noon. There are top 10 games that deserve to be at noon. Top 10, because that's the rankings. That doesn't actually mean they're two competitive teams. And I will give you an example. I will give you a couple of examples. Last year, Ohio State, Indiana. Ohio State won that game. It was number 2 against number 5. Ohio State, if you don't remember, won that game 38-15. The Buckeyes, at the end of the third quarter, were up 28-7, then went up 31-7 with 8:56 to play. That game was over. It was, while I think Indiana deserved to be in the college football playoff, it was clear that Ohio State and Indiana weren't on the same level, but they were ranked in the top 5. So because of this bill, if this were to happen, it won't. But if it were to happen, that would have had to be a 3:30 or a night game in late November. Say what you want about the cold. Somebody was telling me it was only 40 degrees that night. I remember walking out of Ohio Stadium and it being pretty chilly, wishing I'd brought a heavier coat. But I remember the game there was no one there at the end. I mean, there were people there, but people had left. People went on with their day. To put that game at night, would the atmosphere have been better? Sure, probably. People get to tailgate all day. But by the end of the game, it wouldn't matter. Here's an even better example. In 2021, Ohio State played Michigan State on November 20th. It was what was Ohio State ranked? Number 4 against number 7. It was supposed to be this big game. And I think if you went back and looked at our predictions for that game, I think we were pretty confident. Maybe not the 56-7 score that it was in the end, but that Ohio State was going to handle Michigan State, and that was an overrated Michigan State team. Look, Michigan State and Indiana both, Indiana was undefeated. Michigan State, I think going into that game was 9-1. So like they'd earned the right to be ranked that high. But I also think if you have a law that says it can't be a noon game, then you're forcing a game that probably isn't that exciting to go later. And it's just not necessary. At halftime of that game, it was 49-0. That is a noon game. And, while maybe you didn't expect it to be that heavily of a blowout at halftime, I think most people knew that Ohio State was going to win that game comfortably. That is a game that doesn't need to be played at night. Could it be? Sure. That's fine. You want to put a top 10 game or a game between two top 10 teams at night, be my guest. But it doesn't need to be at night because by halftime, no one cares anymore. And so I think to legislate something and say that it has to be a 3:30 or a night game just because of the rankings, it is preposterous. And I understand that people want to have a reason that Fox can't schedule these big noon games, but that is not the way to go about it. And it's probably not even the intent, as I said before. I also think that there are some thoughts that fans seem to have about the need for night games. The first one that I've seen a lot is that it brings in all this money. And on the Ohio State side of things, you're almost always going to sell out the shoe. There are some exceptions against, maybe non-power four teams in the non-conference, or, you play a really bad Big Ten team that it doesn't completely sell out. But Ohio State isn't having issues selling out the horseshoe, isn't making plenty of money on game days. That's whether it's noon, 3:30, 8, 7, whatever. You could play that game in the middle of the night, and I think people would show up for it. It doesn't matter. You're not hurting because you're playing more noon games. Look at Ohio State's schedule last year. Do you think they lost money because they played more noon games? No. I've also seen people suggest that businesses around campus lose money or make more money from night games. And from my understanding and talking to some of these businesses, that's really not true. Maybe it is a little bit, but not a sizable amount. If you have a night game, maybe you get people tailgating during the day, especially if it's a big game, or going to bars, restaurants on campus during the day. But a lot of people, and look, I think if you go to Ohio Stadium, like, it's not a culture of all day tailgating. There are people that do it, don't get me wrong, but it's not like, Madison, Wisconsin, or some of the SEC schools where people are out there all day. So most of these bar restaurants are going to make about the same, because if you have a noon game or 3:30 game, people are going to go before for a little bit probably. But then there's a bunch of traffic. A lot of people go to bars, restaurants afterwards, don't want to spend money at the stadium because of the prices. They'll go and spend time there, watch the games that come on afterwards or whatnot. So the money for those places is probably about the same. Maybe you make a little bit more because people want to be out more during the day before a night game. Maybe not. But in talking to some people that are around, have interests in the bars restaurant scene on Ohio State's campus, that doesn't seem to be a major impact for them. The other thing, and I haven't seen this, but I think it's important to mention, is the bars and restaurants that aren't around campus. The places that, okay, you're not going to the game. Maybe you live in, I don't know, Westerville, and you're not going to the game. It's a big game, but you still want to go out and be with a bunch of Buckeye fans, and you're going to go to, I don't know, pick a bar restaurant in Westerville or Dublin or wherever. Those places probably benefit more from having the games earlier in the day. People come in at 10:30, 11. They start drinking, they get lunch before the game, they stay for the whole game. Maybe they stay later and watch more games afterwards, as opposed to the night games where people aren't coming in until later in the day. You're probably not getting that whole day's business that you would throughout the course of the day. And now you do get the bump of a night game. And yes, it's a big game, so people are going to come out, but people are going to come out at noon anyway. So I don't think that I know that there's not this huge difference in the financial aspect of having a night game versus a noon game. Now, I'm not saying that they shouldn't have more night games. I don't want that to be misconstrued. I would be in favor of these bigger games being night games. But I think it's important to also remember, we used to not have night games at all in college football. That was it's a relatively new thing. I think ESPN did a documentary not too long ago about like how night games got started, which was really interesting. And it hasn't been that long. I don't remember the date off the top of my head. I think it was one of the SEC schools that first did a night game, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong in that, but it was an interesting, I don't know if it was a 30 for 30, but documentary. So we have had a long history of college football without night games, and the sport has been just fine. I think you also look at the specialness of night games. I don't think having so many night games that it's not unique and not exciting is a good thing. I think that I would rather it be the fun, 1-2 time a season type of thing. When I was in college, when I went to Ohio State, like, some of the fun was, hey, we're going to drink all day. We're going to, tailgate. We're going to go to bars. We're going to drink at somebody's house, all that. I remember several times when we did that. And that's a blast. But there's also something fun, especially for a college kid about getting up at 5 in the morning before a Michigan game. I remember one year we got up and one of the bars had this deal where starting at, I think it was 6 a.m., the certain beers were 25 cents or something like that. And it went up 5 cents every half an hour or whatever. Like, we were there at 5:45. Like, that was awesome as a college kid. So, like, yeah, is there a reason to have night games? Absolutely. But I think you can still do a lot of the stuff if you want to for those noon games. Again, I love night games. I think they're great. The atmosphere, it's definitely better at a night game. I'm not going to do that. If you were at the Tennessee game last year, you saw some of the stuff Ohio State is trying to do at Ohio Stadium. I think the push for more night games on Fox is legitimate. But I think having a bill saying that it can't happen in Ohio is just ridiculous. So that's my thoughts with some facts backed in. I saw a bunch of comments in here. First of all, Robert McIntosh asked drink of the day. I said it off the top. I had to run and get one because I forgot about it, which is not like me. Red Stripe. I bought a case last week, so I'll probably be drinking Red Stripe for a couple weeks here. This was actually one of my favorite when I was in college. One of my favorite fancier beers, if you will. They're a little bit more expensive than your general college beers, but hooray beer. Cheers. Robert McIntosh also said, any rumors of Texas-Ohio State game time change? And here's another thing. They have not announced the time for this game. So while everyone assumes, myself included, that it will be a noon game, that hasn't been set. And I think that that's important to get out there because I do think there was some incorrect reporting on that. And I think, again, another educated opinion here, there's pushback from Ohio State, from my understanding, to try and get a game like that at night. Maybe not every game, maybe the Penn State game still ends up being a noon game, but like this Texas game, I think Ohio State has made a case to Fox and the powers that be that like this should be a night game. Will it be? I don't know, but in terms of rumors of a time change, there hasn't been anything set. But as of before this came out, I would say 95% confident that it was going to be on Fox and be a big noon game. I would say I'm less than confident that it will be a noon game now. I don't know what percentage I'd put at it, but from people I've talked to, it does sound like Ohio State is trying to get this into the night slot, or at least a later slot. All right, let's see if there were any more. I think there were some more comments about this. I just want to address those now. Waylon Tyler J, sorry if I said that wrong, said, I was hoping Lee Corso would end it the way it started, pick Brutus. I assume game day, I don't know if it's been announced. I assume game day will be at that game, regardless of what time it is. Robert McIntosh. This is another thing I forgot to bring up. This is another thing that gets tossed around a lot, that night games help recruiting. I'm not saying it doesn't. Night games do. It's much easier for kids, especially kids outside of Ohio, to get to Ohio Stadium for a visit for a Saturday night game because they're playing Friday night football most places. But I think if you look at Ohio State's recruiting, since they've been on Fox more and more and more, the recruiting hasn't gotten worse. If you think about what actually happens on a game day at Ohio Stadium for recruits, like that is not actually the best time for a visit. Now, it's a great time to see the stadium and where you could be playing. And like that's certainly a factor when you are a recruit, and that can sway some things. But you get very little time with the coaches. You get very little time with the players. You don't get to see as much because part of your day is made up of the game day experience. You do get to see campus on game day. You do get to take in the atmosphere at Ohio Stadium. So like that is important. But if you talk to coaches, you talk to people involved, like it's just one factor. There's a reason that they have official visits other times of the year, because then they get to spend a lot of time talking to coaches and how they're going to fit and how they're going to take care of this kid and things like that. And a lot of times that's even more important than the, I went and saw Ohio State play Penn State at night. I'm not saying it's not important. People love to see that stuff, but it's one factor of a series of factors that go into kids making their decisions. So it definitely helps that you can get more kids to those bigger games because they're night games, but it is not the end all be all that people think. Let's see. Yeah, Carl's A Gasser, 2525 at Texas will be at night. Will be at night and a huge advantage. I don't know if it's a huge advantage. I think that the horseshoe can get rocking for noon games. I've been at quite a few Penn State, Michigan games that were at noon that had great atmospheres. Again, like there is something special about under the lights and all of that, and people do get to tailgate all day, but I don't know if it is like I don't know. I think it'd be an interesting study. I haven't done it. I don't know if I will do it, but looking at and you probably need a bigger sample size of these big time noon games, but looking at how that affects the result versus what happens at night. I don't think it's as big as people think. Rick Montoya, as long as they get the W, I'm good. Yeah, that's ultimately it, right? The wins on the field. And Tyler Kersley, I don't know why that came out weird. He says the fans may not like it, but guess what? The players prefer playing at noon. That's another good point. I won't say every player or every coach, but they do have differing opinions. Like some guys like to get up, get it going, play the game, and then have their Saturday evening with their families, with their friends, whatever it may be. There are some guys that like to play under the lights. Like I think it's a mix of opinions. We've talked to guys about this on the record. A lot of guys also just say like we're going to play whenever. And I think we should point out like look at the Rose Bowl, for instance. If you're in California for the Rose Bowl, that's a mid-afternoon game, early afternoon game. I think it's usually like 2:30 out there. That's one of the biggest games of the year. Obviously it's a different atmosphere because it's split, but that people find time to tailgate and things for that. Let's see if there's anything else here before we get to what I actually wanted to talk about in this. Yeah, Will Starr says the recruiting thing. Yeah, I just addressed that. Yeah, I mean, more recruits can come at night. There's no doubt about that, but I don't think it makes as big of an impact as people think. Tyler said you're going to have issues at night games. Both types of games have their consequences, good and bad. I agree. Let's see. Again, Andre Green asking, is there any way to move the game tonight? Again, it hasn't been scheduled. It hasn't been announced for a time. Will Starr says the later time competes with the NBC game. Yeah, I'm not sure that they're worried about that. Like Fox doesn't, Fox cares about getting its eyeballs. I don't think they care about who they're competing with, even if it is another Big Ten game. Again, Will Starr, he says most players prefer the primetime slot, more eyeballs on them. I found that not to be true. I think it's a very mixed bag, and some people just don't even care at all. Okay. I'm sure there'll be more comments about this if you'd like to, but feel free to continue to discuss it. I can look back at this at the end. But I'm going to get into what I really wanted to do this podcast on, and that is I did a story on 3 days ago. So that was Tuesday that it was my rankings of Ohio State's position groups coming out of spring practice. And I based this mostly on talent, depth, and experience at each position. Cheers, by the way. And if you want to read this, we'll have there should be the link for this story in the description, but it's on Bucknuts. It's called Ranking Ohio State's Position Groups After Spring Practice. You can find it pretty easily. If you've already read it, I appreciate it. So I'm going to go through this and give a little bit more information, a little more feedback on why I ranked these this way. I'm also going to do it in reverse order. I did the position rankings from the lowest ranked. I'm going to start at the top in this one because I think some of these aren't as surprising and probably won't need as much explanation. Feel free, if you're watching this live, to comment as you go. I will point out where I created some controversy, I guess, with some of my rankings, but let's get into it. So at number 1, I had Ohio State's wide receivers. I don't think that's going to surprise anybody. Brian Hartline continues to be one of the best in the country at filling that room with talent. You look at the players coming back, it's Jeremiah Smith, it's Carnell Tate. Jeremiah Smith had a ridiculous freshman season. Carnell Tate had a pretty good sophomore season and will be even better as a junior in 2024. You got Brandon Inniss, who we expect to step in for Emeka Egbuka, Bryson Rogers, Mylan Graham, Quincy Porter. I could go on. This, I think, is one of the best position rooms in the country, not just at Ohio State. It's just unreal what Brian Hartline has done and what he continues to do. And so for me, that was a no-brainer, number 1. At number 2, I put tight end, and that may come as a surprise to people just because of how Ohio State has used tight ends. There's not been a ton of specifically statistical production, but if you look at this room, you did lose G. Scott. You bring back Will Kazmarek, Bennett Christian, Jelani Thurman, Max LeBlanc. All 4 of those guys played last year. All 4 of those guys saw at least some snaps, if not a lot of snaps, during the college football playoff run. Will Kazmarek proved to be a pretty good blocker last year. It was improving his pass catching. Obviously missed some games after the injury in the Oregon game. Bennett Christian was coming back from the year-long suspension in 2023. I thought he showed some good things. Jelani Thurman, I think we'd still like to see more from him, but athletic freak, had made some big plays, some big catches. I think you want more from that, but he's another year more experienced. Didn't see a ton of Max LeBlanc, but that's a guy I know that they really like. And then Ohio State goes out and adds Max Clare. Cheers. The top-ranked tight end in the transfer portal. He had a lot of options in terms of where to go. He chose to come to Ohio State. He wants to be a more complete tight end, but that gives you another receiving option. If you remember back to the spring game, the touchdown pass he caught, like Max LeBlanc is going to have a field day because of the attention that's going to be spent covering these Ohio State wide receivers. You've got a young quarterback, young or inexperienced quarterback, whoever it is that wins the job. Well, a tight end or a guy over the middle can be a quarterback's best friend. I think that's a huge addition that just gives you another weapon. So for me, like experience, check. Depth, check. Talent, no doubt, check. Whether that statistically plays out that way, I think it's hard to judge the tight ends that way because they don't always get the ball, and there's a lot of other things that tight ends do that don't necessarily show up on the stat sheet. But this is going to be a room that should be really productive for Ohio State in 2025. And I think the Buckeyes could use the tight ends more than they have in the past game, given you have Max Clare, Jelani Thurman, and then, Will Kazmarek, Bennett Christian improving as pass catchers. I think it'll be interesting to see kind of how Keenan Bailey rotates these guys, how, when they're on the field, how often each guy's on the field, things like that. It's a good problem to have when you have the depth and the talent that he's got in the room. At number 3, I had cornerback. Obviously, you lose a guy like Denzel Burke, and that should be difficult to replace. But at Ohio State, with the way Tim Walton has recruited that room, similar to Brian Hartline, like Buckeyes should be just fine. Davison Igbinosun coming back for his senior year is big. Obviously, he has room to improve, has got to stop getting those penalties. That's something that's been a big focus this offseason for him and the coaching staff, I know. So, if he can cut down on that, I think Davison Igbinosun has the skill, the athletic ability, the size to be a star cornerback in the Big Ten. You've got Jermaine Matthews Jr., who is going to step in for Denzel Burke. Also may play some in the slot if they need him to. Did some of that in spring. Aaron Scott Jr., Bryce West, freshman Devin Sanchez, 5-star kid that a lot of people have compared to, what Jeremiah Smith was able to do coming in last year. I don't know if he'll get that kind of playing time this year. I said the same thing about Jeremiah Smith, so I might be wrong there. And then Lorenzo Styles Jr., who was the backup at nickel last year. I'm going to get to nickel. I grouped that with the safeties. So I think there are high expectations for this group. I think there are, the depth is good, the talent is good, the experience is pretty good. Davison Igbinosun obviously has played a lot. Jermaine Matthews started that Penn State game a couple of years ago when Denzel Burke was hurt. He played quite a bit last year, especially the second half of last year and in the playoff. Not so much for the other guys. Lorenzo Styles Jr. is the next most experienced guy, and he doesn't have a ton of experience, at least playing cornerback. He has played wide receiver for Notre Dame. But the talent, the depth, I really like that. The experience is not as much as you'd like, but given what you lost last year with Denzel Burke, and you could even throw Jordan Hancock in there a little bit, I think that is the experience isn't quite where you want it to be, but still good enough. Number 4, I have offensive line. And if you think about where we were what we were saying about the offensive line a year ago, it's crazy that I have the offensive line this high. And I don't think there is a ton of argument about this offensive line group. Maybe we'll look back and this will be silly if they don't play up to the expectations I have for them. But I think coming out of spring practice, I felt much better about this group, even losing both tackles, really 4 guys that started at tackle last year, and your starting center for most of the season. I think you're in a pretty good spot. If I'm projecting what I think the offensive line looks like going into the season, I would say Ethan Onyanwa, at left tackle, Luke Montgomery at left guard, Carson Hinsman at center, Tegra Shabola at right guard, and Austin Sareveld at right tackle. That's a pretty good group. Obviously Ethan Onyanwa needs to prove that he can do it at this level. He was the transfer from Rice. Luke Montgomery worked so well in that guard rotation, that 3-man guard rotation during College Football Playoff, that he started the national championship game and played well. I think he will only be better now for that experience. Cheers. Carson Hinsman obviously started all of the 2023 season, got moved into a backup role last season when Seth McLaughlin came in. But then when he was called upon after they moved Donovan Jackson to left tackle, played really well at guard, I thought, and then moved back to center and was pretty good. Made it through the College Football Playoff, I thought, without many issues. So now you have a guy who started multiple times back at center. Tegra Shabola, up and down, I would say, last season, but ultimately probably more ups than downs, and has a full season as a starter under his belt. And then Austin Sareveld is just kind of your Swiss Army knife, and that's probably the position that could still change if somebody else steps up and is able to take that right tackle spot. Do they do a rotation with guard like they did last year? Do they do do they plug him? If you're not entirely sold on Tegra Shabola, for instance, could Austin Sareveld be your guy there? He could basically play anywhere on the offensive line. I don't know how much snapping he's done, to play center, but that is a good group of 5, and much better than I would have expected, given where we were, like I said, a year ago, and the guys that you lost. And then depth, I think, is solid. Not going to say it's great. Philip Daniels, the Minnesota transfer, if he rises up to push Austin Sareveld at right tackle, I think that would be big for the Buckeyes to have another guy you can trust at tackle. I mean, you've got Ian Moore, who started spring as the left tackle ahead of Ethan Onyanwa with the first team. Eventually he was with the second team. Gabe Van Sickle, Josh Padilla it will be your backup center if you needed to move Carson Hinsman for any reason. And then Jake Cook, the freshman, people have talked about how quickly he started to pick things up. So I think you'd probably like a bit more numbers there, but it's still a really good group. If this group stays healthy, I think it will be a really solid offensive line. If they do have to move things around, I think there's a little bit of options. And we saw last year, you can figure some things out. Obviously, different coaching staff, but I like what Tyler Bowen and his group is doing there. Let's move on. So we are at number 5. This is where I started to get people a little upset. I'll get to that in a second. Number 5, I went running back. So Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson leave. James Peoples is going to be the guy that steps up. Was limited his freshman year just because of the two guys ahead of him. But I think it's important to point out early in the season, now it was against Akron, but in the third quarter against Akron, James Peoples was in the game as Ohio State's with Ohio State's first team offense, which tells me this is James Peoples, the freshman, by the way, in his first collegiate game ever. But that tells me that Carlos Lachlan has a lot of trust in James Peoples. And he was able to turn that into his first career touchdown on his first career touch. That made it 38-6. So, at 31-6, like Ohio State's in control, but they aren't necessarily running away. It's not like James Peoples was in at, the final score of 52-6. Early enough that caught my attention at that time. And I think, we only saw James Peoples in fits and starts throughout the season, but you talk to people about James Peoples, there's a lot of excitement. Carlos Lachlan, though he's, he'll do this with most guys, kind of tempered the expectations for a guy who hasn't played a lot. But the comparisons to J.K. Dobbins that some guys made at the NFL Combine, like this should be a future star on your hands. Then you bring in C.J. Donaldson, the transfer from West Virginia, and you've got a guy who has played at the Power 4 level, has been successful. I know that if you look at the stats, he's never had 800 rushing yards in a season, but back-to-back 11 touchdown seasons while sharing the workload. So he's already done this whole split backfield thing, and he did it in an offense that wasn't as good as Ohio State's. West Virginia, no insult to them, but that's not an offense that I'm like, oh boy, watch out for those guys. Whereas Ohio State, consistently a top 25, sometimes even better offense. I just talked to you about the offensive line he's going to play behind. Like, I think C.J. Donaldson could be really productive and surprise a lot of people this season while sharing the workload with James Peoples, similar to a year ago. And then Carlos Lachlan wants to use him in different ways. This is a guy who played receiver and tight end in high school. He thinks they can line him up in some different spots and, throw him the ball and things like that. So for a top two, which is what I think it will be, I think that's a really talented duo. Is it the same as last year? Is it as good as last year? I'm not ready to say that yet, but I think it's really talented. And some may and did disagree with me on that. And then in terms of depth, not a ton of experience at depth, I'll give you that. But Sam Williams-Dixon, another guy who can do a lot of different things. I know that he didn't play a ton as a freshman, entered the transfer portal, came back, but I think that you can get creative in the ways that you can use Sam Williams-Dixon, similar, as has been said about him a lot, to a guy like Curtis Samuel. And then freshman Bo Jackson, he was one of the guys I was really impressed with during spring. Every time we got to watch the Buckeyes scrimmage, I thought he stood out. He looks ready, and running back, and I'm going to bring this up again in a couple of positions, but running back is a position where you can step in early. And yes, you have to work on pass protection, things like that, but you can get running backs in the game at the college level as freshmen, and you see it a lot that they are successful. So while I don't know if Bo Jackson is going to play a ton, just because I do think it's going to be a two-man rotation, I really liked what I saw from him in spring, and I think he's another guy who's a future star on this team. And then you have Isaiah West, who was injured, a high school injury, held him out most of spring. So we didn't get to see a ton of him, but another guy who was highly recruited. Ohio State's excited about him. And then Anthony Turbo Rogers, he'll arrive this summer. I've talked with Carlos Lachlan about him. They are very excited about him as well. So, yes, you have your depth is a second-year redshirt freshman player and 3 true freshmen, which is not a lot of experience, which is why running back is at 5. But I think overall talent in this room is really, really good. And I do think, if, knock on wood, James Peoples or C.J. Donaldson got hurt, I think you could put Bo Jackson out there and you would probably be pretty good. You obviously don't want to have to turn to a running back to be one of your primary guys, but I don't think that Ohio State would be that upset if that happened, other than they would lose a really good player in one of the starters. So that's why I have running back at 5. We're going to circle back to running back in a minute because of some of the comments I got. At number 6, I have linebacker. James Laurinaitis, I think, is building something really good in the linebacker room. This is only his second year as a full-time linebackers coach. So, he's really kind of getting this going. I think you saw it last year with how well Cody Simon played. And then the progression throughout the season of Sonny Styles. And I think Sonny Styles, in addition to likely being a captain, likely being a block go guy, coming off 100 tackles last season, is only going to be better. I think he could be one of the best linebackers in the country. And this is coming from someone who, coming out of that Michigan State game last year, I was pretty down on Sonny Styles. I was sort of like, I don't know if he has the instincts, maybe. He just wasn't playing. He was thinking too much. He even admitted that. And it was like, okay, this needs to start coming along. And it did. Maybe I was a little impatient with wanting to see the best of Sonny Styles, but I think you did. I think it's only going to get better. He now has a full season at linebacker. Remember, he was playing safety and nickel 2 years ago. Full season at linebacker under his belt. I thought he was really good down the stretch and into the college football playoff. As I mentioned, he's a likely captain. Cody Simon said he would be his pick to be Block O. I think one of the best defensive players in the country, one of the best linebackers in the country. Then you had Arvell Reese next to him. You guys all got to see Arvell Reese some last season. I think his instinct to go get the ball, plus his knowledge of the game, which he's talked about has grown, I think is only going to make him better. He is different than Cody Simon, no doubt about that. But he's a guy who I think can really step in, and while it'll look different, play that middle linebacker role. And, alongside Sonny Styles, we saw it some last year. Cheers. I think this is going to be a really good tandem. We don't know with Matt Patricia if it'll be like it was under Jim Knowles with basically two linebackers all the time. Very rarely did they go to three. Could they do more three linebackers? We'll see if they do, or when they need to go to a third linebacker. Peyton Pierce was a guy who was talked about a lot in spring. James Laurinaitis brought him up. Some other coaches brought him up as a guy standing out. So you do have a little bit of depth there. You do have the option to go to a third linebacker if you want. And then behind them, you have some young guys, Garrett Stover, Eli Lee, TJ Alford, Riley Pettijohn. All guys I think will be good players down the road. Probably not guys you want to have starting right now. So that's why I don't think the depth is great. But, you could do worse than those guys if you needed to throw them into a game and have them play. I think that's a solid group of young players that'll get some more experience this year. Again, if you're watching this live, if you have comments, questions about these rankings, feel free to throw those in the chat. If you have questions about anything, we were talking about the kickoff times earlier, feel free to throw those. We should have a few minutes here at the end to address. So I know we got through some of them earlier, but if you have any more, don't hesitate. I love to have back and forth conversations. I love when people tell me I'm wrong too. And this may be the place where people tell me I'm wrong, because I've already been told that this is crazy. At number 7, I have the safeties. And I got a lot of blowback on this. Even some of my coworkers thought that this ranking was incorrect. So, maybe I will look silly with this, but yes, I know you have Caleb Downs coming back. Yes, he could be the best player in college football, the best defensive player in college football. I mean, he has Heisman Trophy odds. I get that. Caleb Downs, I think if he weren't returning this season, safety would probably be at the bottom of this list, because you'll lose a guy like Lathan Ransom, who was very good for Ohio State. I think Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom form the best safety duo in the country. Plus, and I mentioned this earlier, I'm including nickel in this. I don't know exactly how Ohio State under Matt Patricia is going to use the nickel, but under Jim Knowles last year, Jordan Hancock was dropping deep into a safety role at times so that, whether it be Lathan Ransom, Caleb Downs could get closer to the line. They did a lot of things that almost made Jordan Hancock more of a safety than a corner with that nickel spot. Will they do that again this year under Matt Patricia? I don't know. Do they have the guys to do that this year? I don't know. That's part of the reason I have safety lower. Jalen McClain and Malik Hartford are the two guys that were really competing for the spot next to Caleb Downs. I think these are talented players. I do. I think Jalen McClain could end up being really good. But I think that they are both, I know they're both pretty inexperienced. They haven't played much. Malik Hartford did start a game 2 years ago. but was pulled from that game, if you remember correctly. I think it was like the second or third game of the 2023 season. Jalen McClain got some snaps. I know he had a good spring game. But for me, that's, I need more from that. I need, especially when you're replacing guys like that, I need more. So the argument I saw a lot was that, I should have had running back below safety. And the explanation that I was given from people on our message boards and people on social media was, you have maybe the best defensive player in the country, whatever you want to say about Caleb Downs. And you've got two inexperienced guys, but guys with a lot of talent, you think, versus a running back room with one guy with a lot of experience, and then guys who haven't played a ton. And I think, going back to my point earlier, I think it's easier to insert young running backs into bigger roles than it is to ask one of these younger, inexperienced safeties to go out there and be Lathan Ransom. Like, I think you could turn Bo Jackson into a closer version of Quinshon Judkins quicker than you could make Jalen McClain or Malik Hartford Lathan Ransom, for instance. Those aren't like-for-like comparisons. That's not fair to do. But you get my point there, is that I just think that it's easier to have a young running back go out there, carry the ball. Yes, you're going to have to figure out some pass protection things. You hopefully don't have to worry about ball security, but that is a thing with younger running backs. But it's easier, there's not a huge difference between what you're doing in high school at running back and what you're doing in college. Obviously, bigger, faster people, but you also are Ohio State playing behind what I think is a really good offensive line. Whereas with safety, I think you're asking them to do a lot more than what they did in high school. And yes, both these guys have been in the program. I'm not saying they're fresh out of high school, but I just don't think that it is as easy. And I also just haven't seen as much from these two. I saw James Peoples play with the first team offense and score a touchdown last year. I saw Malik Hartford get pulled from a game and not start again a couple of years ago. So again, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I just felt that the safety position outside of Caleb Downs, we don't have enough information on. And I watched them in practice. I spent days watching when we were there. Caleb Downs didn't do a ton in practice. Cheers. And I think there's still room to grow for these younger safeties. Not saying they can't. I've talked to people that have said really good things in the program about Jalen McClain and Malik Hartford. So I think you do have some options there. I just haven't seen it enough to put them higher on this list. And, maybe I'm crazy because Caleb Downs is that good and can help make up for it. But for me, I just don't see it yet. I love Caleb Downs and what he brings to this team. There were times last year it was like, wow, this guy is really playing for Ohio State. And behind those two, I should mention Fahim Delaney had a good spring. Obviously, had the interception in the spring game. Leroy Roker III, also, a guy who I think probably in the future maybe could do some things for this team. So that's my explanation. Am I crazy? Should running back be lower than safety? Do I have other ones mixed up? Let me know. At 8, I had quarterback. And this largely has to do with the fact that there just isn't a starting quarterback. I think if one of the guys of Lincoln Keenholz, Julian Sayin, really those two, but we'll throw Tavian St. Clair in as well because he is in the room. If one of those guys had lit it up in spring and gone out and whether Ryan Day named it or not, we came out of spring being like, that's the guy. Come on. I think this probably would be higher, but there was just not enough consistency. And we frankly just haven't seen it enough outside of practice. Lincoln Keenholz, the most snaps he got, obviously unfair to judge him entirely on this, but in that Cotton Bowl game, it wasn't great. Now he's grown. He certainly showed that in spring. That he's a better player than he was a couple of years ago. And I think that's why this is as tough of a competition as it is. Julian Sayin looked great at times before his freshman season. Looked great in the spring game, but 2 scrimmages before the spring game, not so much. Can he put it together consistently? If he can, I think this position moves up very quickly. Same with Lincoln Keenholz, frankly. And then Tavian St. Clair, as Ryan Day said, likely, needs some time in this offense before he's really involved in a starting conversation. I think the talent in this room is good. Not a lot of experience, not a ton of depth either, which is the thing. Only 3 scholarship quarterbacks. There was talk about whether Ohio State would add a 4th scholarship quarterback in the transfer portal. I don't think that guy ever really emerged, a guy who was willing to come in and just be a backup. So you only have 3 guys, which isn't ideal. So that's why I put quarterback a little bit lower. At number 9, I have defensive end. And this is another one that some people pushed back on a little bit. But I think it's more just I need to see it from these guys. You've got Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry returning from last 3 seasons. Finally going to be, you think, in a bigger role after playing behind Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimalau. If they can be as good as these other guys, I think that you are in a really good spot. But we just don't know. We've seen so little of them because Jack and JT played so much. The expectation is that they will be, but I think even now coming out of spring practice, I'm not entirely sure that they are both starters every game. The Buckeyes did bring in Logan George from Idaho State. He looked good in spring. Now, spring practice, going against new tackles, usually doing it with a second string group. So we'll see what that looks like, how much he contributes. Bo Atkinson coming out of North Carolina. He came in obviously after spring practice, so we haven't really seen him. I think the talent is good. I like that addition a lot. He's a guy who I think could push for one of those starting end spots or at least play a lot. But without seeing it, it's hard to know what that looks like. And then CJ Hicks, obviously converted linebacker, can rush the passer, super athletic. But again, we haven't seen him much at defensive end. So for me, it's a question mark still of how these guys all work and how productive it can be. And let's not forget, like Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimalau ended their career really well, but there were questions about them. Even going back to the first half of last season, like the statistical production just really wasn't there. So, why am I going to assume that these guys are going to hit the ground running? I think they need to show it is what I'm saying here. And then finally at 10, defensive tackle. You lost Tyleik Williams. You lost Ty Hamilton. 2 very productive guys on the interior. We believe that they are going to be replaced by Caden McDonald and Edric Houston as starters. Both guys talented. I think the expectation should be high for them, but limited experience. Caden McDonald played a little bit as came in on goal line, short yardage situations. Edric Houston converted from defensive end last season, played more as the season went on. And then there's the depth concern. Tywone Malone, Jason Moore, Will Smith Jr., Jarquez Carter, the freshman. Those are all guys that are in the mix, but do any of those guys really excite you? I don't know. We haven't seen enough, and I didn't see a ton from them in spring that I'm like, oh, that's the guy. Now, I did write, and you can go read this on Bucknuts. I wrote this yesterday, Thursday, asking really like how big of an issue is it that the Buckeyes may not have depth, and I think you'll be surprised. You're looking at last year and how much Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton played versus the backups. Like the Buckeyes were very successful leaning heavily on the starters. And you can read more about that. Dave Biddle had a story about Will Smith Jr. I know he and Jay Book talked about it on this morning's BM5, potentially as a guy who could step into a bigger role given some of the stuff he did in spring. But for me, this is the position that's probably the most concerning. I just think that you need to figure out the depth and are the starters going to be as good as the starters a year ago? I think that's a fair question to ask. So did I get it right? Let me know. Let's see. I think there were a few comments here that we'll get to, and then we're almost at an hour. So pretty good time there. Doug Shepard Sr. said Peyton Pierce in the middle with Arvell and Sonny on the wings would be impenetrable. Yeah, the issue just is the way offenses are set up these days. It's so hard to play 3 linebackers a lot. You need a really athletic linebacker, and Sonny can do that, obviously. You saw him a couple of years ago when he was playing nickel, covering slot receivers, tight ends. I mean, basically, if you're doing that, who are you taking off the field? Probably the nickel. So you need somebody who can do some of those things while also being a linebacker. Well, it's the reason that teams play with so much nickel these days. I think that's going to be Ohio State's base defense. But if Peyton Pierce is good enough and Sonny Styles can do some of those things, Matt Patricia is not going to not play guys just to stick to one defense, which I think is something that is a big benefit of Matt Patricia. He's going to do what's best for this defense, and that could be those three more than we've seen the last couple of years. Tyler Kersley, I'm not worried about this team at all. I think receiver play, running back, quarterback, offensive line, linebacker, safety, cornerback, and defensive line are all strengths, and the coaching staff. Very optimistic, Tyler. I like that. Doug Shepard said BM is the medical abbreviation of bowel movement. Yes. It's also Bucknuts Morning 5. So, but yes, that is true. Okay. Well, I think we got through those. Interested to see how people receive this. Obviously, I had my thoughts about the kickoff times. Again, I like night games. I want there to be more night games, but I thought there was some interesting stuff to share with you on that. And then my rankings there. I know some people didn't agree with them. Let me know if you disagree. You can yell at me on Twitter. If you're on the Bucknuts message board, you can yell at me there as well if you think I did things wrong in those rankings, or on the kickoff times if you disagree with me there. Like I said off the top, if you're watching this on YouTube, Doug Shepard said, big fan of BM5. Good. We love that. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. Thumbs up, turn on notifications. You can get all of our videos. We're going to have coming next month, Ohio State recruiting camps kick off again. And Bill Kurlick, Steve Hellwagon, and I are going to be out there. We'll have videos and interviews from kids there. Bill Kurlick and I are also going to start a podcast. It's really Bill's podcast. I'm just helping. There'll be more on that, but a more recruiting-focused podcast. So keep an eye out on that. That will also go up on our YouTube page and any of the places you're listening or watching this. If you're Facebook, Twitter, thanks for following us. If you're listening to this as a podcast, please comment, leave a 5-star review. That stuff helps us out quite a bit. Anyway, this is a good show. Thanks, guys, for all the comments. I love having the conversation with you guys when we do this. Another Bucknuts Happy Hour in the book. Cheers.